Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our workshop, Future Pathways Fundraising with DeMarcus Akeem Suggs. So happy to have him here with us today. My name is Kathy Liao, pronouns she, her, and I am a East Asian woman with a short bob wearing a gray FERPA sweater with a virtual background with some greenery back there. I am the Organizational Services Program Officer here at Mid-America Arts Alliance. Welcome, everyone. I know people are still trickling in. We're getting into the holiday season, so I thank you all for setting aside the time today and choosing to share space with us here today. We here at Mid-America Arts Alliance believes in strengthening and supporting artists, cultural organizations, and communities throughout the region and beyond. We're a regional arts organization representing Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. And it's really exciting to see people from all around here beyond our region. So thank you all for joining us. Um, I am representing the Organizational Services Division here at Mid-America Arts Alliance. And through our programming, we offer a combination of workshops, coach consultations, and peer-to-peer learning opportunities to work with arts leaders and to govern more effectively, to become more fiscally astute and develop strategy to address community needs. This series of workshop, Future Pathways, came out of conversations, arts ecosystem discussions and conversations, came out of needs that we heard from the arts ecosystem across our region. So with that, so happy to introduce our facilitator today, DeMarcus Akeem Suggs. I'm going to do a brief intro and I'll let him talk about himself in a bit here. DeMarcus is the inaugural director of the Office of Creative and Cultural Economy for the City of Memphis, a groundbreaking initiative that strategically integrates economic development with the city's dynamic creative sector, including music, film, dance, visual, and culinary arts. In this role, Suggs is dedicated to advancing Memphis creative and cultural assets, expanding economic opportunities, and fostering an artist-led, community-centric arts sector. With a distinguished career in the arts administration and revenue development, Suggs previously served as the Director of Development for Mid-America Arts Alliance, we miss him, where he led a 3.5 million contributed revenue portfolio and played a pivotal role in shaping the Delta Arts and Culture Ecosystem Initiative strategy. He's also the founder and framework culturalist for Kubuntu LLC and has held key positions at organizations such as Alternate Roots, the National Center of Choreography at the University of Akron, and the Victoria Theater Association, a champion for equitable arts, equitable culture, investment, and cross-sector collaboration. Suggs brings extensive experience in fundraising, strategy, and policy development. His leadership in Memphis' newly formed office reflects the city's commitment into harnessing its rich cultural heritage and drive sustainable growth and inclusion. That's such an incredible resume, and we're so excited to have you here. So I'm going to pass the baton. Welcome to Marcus.
Man, thank you so much, Kathy. I love y'all so much, Mid-America Arts Alliance. Those were still my fam, so I'm really grateful to be here and to share the space. And thank y'all for joining us. Fundraising in this season, we know that it's not, I mean, we have a lot of challenges, especially in the arts space. And so I want this to be as fruitful as possible, knowing that we have so many different vantage points in the virtual room here. And so I'll dive in just briefly, just to touch on, as Kathy said, who I am and my work. And so I think of myself as a culturist, one who is engaged not only in culture, but also in nurturing creative ecosystems. I think of a lot about strategy in this work, and that's one of my strengths. I'm going to have a point where we talk about our individual strengths and assets and some of what we touched on in the pre-session questionnaire. But also, I think my work is really rooted in community and leveraging resources to really catalyze community engagement and the arts within community structures. And so I'm currently, as Kathy said, at the city of Memphis, leading the office, which is like the dream job for me, and just all the things coming together as a programmer, but a fundraiser, as well as just an administrator. And then I also have a consulting practice on the side where I still work with civic leaders and arts organizations to develop their own strategies and build out their work in the arts. But this is how we're going to flow today. We basically, we've rolled through our introductions for the most part, but we'll talk about the case for support, and then we'll also lean into some of the systems and then strategies that I've leveraged in this work. What this session will not completely be is necessarily like specific tips and tricks for like major gifts or some of those very nuanced aspects of the fundraising ecosystem, or sorry, the fundraising cycle. But I am really trying to think about the systems that we use to fundraise, and hopefully by leveraging our chat and some of our own expertise that we can share together, that we'll be able to walk away inspired and have some new tools and things that we can apply to our own practices. And so we will dive in with an art moment. And so one of the privileges I always take as a development person is that I never like to disconnect from the creative work or the why essentially of what we get to do. And sometimes when you're fundraising, you feel almost the most removed from the work because you're like, I just want to talk. I have to talk to the funders, or I have to talk to the folks who can support this work. And so I found that it was always really cool and sort of a selfish kind of moment for me to be like, no, we're gonna have an art moment here. And so I am taking that privilege to include 901 Day on Beale, which is a program that we fundraised for and supported through the Office of Creative and Cultural Economy here in Memphis. And so check it out. These are some folks that I love and think they are amazing. And so this was one of our events that had about 29,000 folks here in Memphis this year. So here's 901 Day.
Memphis, 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 Memphis.
All right, so that's a little bit of what we get to do here at the city. And so who's in the room? I thank you so much for everyone who participated in that pre-session questionnaire. It is clear that we have like development folk, and whether you're exclusively in the development lane or if you're maybe in the executive space and also fundraising as part of your work. Y'all are relationship builders. Y'all are the connectors. Y'all are probably the selective extroverts of your teams, if you're not an ambivert. You are the, active listeners, and the organizational operational skills are in the space of the detail oriented. You guys know how to execute a plan and stick to it. You have this unique approach. I loved just reading about how many of y'all are actual artists that just came to this work, organically in some different ways. There's so much wisdom too in this space. There was decades of experience, and whether you have been in PR or management advocacy, and just this sense of emotional intelligence that came up, and accountability, and just it was a palpable passion for this work too. And that got me thinking, who do y'all sound like? Like if we were to embody you as one personality, y'all are Oprah Winfrey's, so this is Team Oprah. Y'all are the voice, the connectors, the spirit of the work. And so I'm excited to talk to Team Oprah here. And some of that, so we'll talk about some of those elements of like your investigative journalism of like getting that data and collecting that information, but also being the human and the empaths of your organizations. And so love that. So let's ground us in like a little bit of data, because it's always important for us to, of course, start with what are the numbers, what's the qualitative and quantitative information that we have at our fingertips. And so philanthropy at a glance, total giving's up in 2024, and this is all coming from Giving USA's 2025 numbers. And so philanthropy at large. Individual giving is up, looking at 66% of all philanthropy came from individual giving. Institutions, in institutions, those are our typical funders, our foundations, our endowments, and the like. Uh, Fairly even. I think it was about down about 0.05%. But bequests are down, which is something that's interesting. And, bequests are our planned giving. So when folks, decide that, their legacy will continue on through an organization, through those planned gifts, and then our corporations, those gifts are up. Some Much of this I can say is can be attributed to the stock market. The stock market really performed well, and if you're like me, when I was at Mid America Arts Alliance, for instance, many of our individual gifts came out of donor advised funds and the like, and so that was really important for us. And so you'll see that the individual giving going up, and I maybe you have some correlation there too. But also with the stock market performing well, that gave room for corporations to have more resources to give. And as many of you know, corporations typically give out of a sense of marketing, and so they were, had more resources to allocate toward maybe their marketing budgets. Being in alignment with an organization like ours was beneficial to them, and so they allocated resources to that. However, just about 4% of that total giving came to the arts and culture ecosystem. And so that's up about 6.4% with, an adjustment for inflation, 9.3% if we think about just actual dollars. And so arts giving is up, but I think as we all can tell, it doesn't always feel like it, within our work. However, the data is pointing to there's, still room for us to expand, but we're not experiencing the declines that we might have experienced pre-pandemic. And so I want to talk about some of the systems and practices that we might have when we're approaching this fundraising work. And so I'm thinking a lot about our case for support. And of course, everything starts with our why. And so I'm curious, like, what is the narrative that really matters? And so one of the formulas that I like to utilize, whether it's through our fundraising campaigns, whether it's through asking and working with our marketing teams, our communication teams, to have some of our institutional marketing, some of that like evergreen information to share. I use this format that starts with what is the context that we exist in. So what's happening? What do others need to know that's kind of related to our work? So for instance, in the city of Memphis, we have a 11% of the state of Tennessee folks attend museums. And so if my work is to provide access to museums and cultural experiences, I want to start with this is a real number that we want to uh, impact or solve for. Then we move towards the problem that we're solving. And as David Cooperrider, the organizational development expert, would say that every organization is a forms out of a solution to a problem in and of its time. And so, what is that actual problem that your program or your work is solving toward? How are you approaching this issue through the solution? So what are the particular mechanisms that you utilize that's directly targeting that problem within this context? And then how do we share our impact and results in a way that's not gimmicky, but it's almost like in conversation with the ecosystems that be. And so I want us to just, think about this in practice. And, I think I'm not going to take as much time here as I wanted to, but let's put on a fresh perspective here. Like what if put on a fresh perspective and write these things out. If you want to, if you have a pen and pad or you want to use a digital notepad of some sort. But as you're thinking about engaging your donors and funders, how might you draft, two different cases for support that can be shared in a very quick, some say elevator pitch, and that's great. But I think a little bit more conversational because my hope is that it's not just going to be that 45-second, but that's the introduction to the work. One of the folks that I follow, Lisa Nichols, inspiration, motivational, or transformational speaker, as she would self-describe, says that, she leads with results. And so a lot of my thoughts around like, here at the city is the results first and then going into more of that context. And so just kind of offhand, I would say that, the arts has the ability to solve many of the systemic issues. And what we experienced on 901 Day was 29,000 people gathered from all parts of our city in a safe environment where over 12 cultural organizations were able to showcase why this is Culture City, as well as 300 plus artists were employed for that day, and also got to shine and demonstrate the artistic excellence of our city. And so we're also, within the broader context, we're a city that's been challenged with, historic numbers of crime as well as poverty. At the same time, we are also one of the largest majority minority cities in the country, being that we're 65% African American. And while poverty and crime are not synonymous with having a black city, the challenges that our city have experienced have been addressed through arts and culture. And so what our office is dedicated to doing is to leveraging resources to invest more into that what we've always gotten right to make sure that that's what shines out, instead of the what we're negatively known for. And so I'll just give you a minute here just to try this on, just thinking about like the context. How would you describe the context of what your environment is, whether you're local, regional, state, or national? Uh, what is the actual problem that you believe that your work is solving towards, or one of the problems? How might one of your programs and offerings be a solution? And then what are the results that you've already experienced as being by employing your work? And so also in that, what I didn't put is what you'll notice as a fundraiser, is that I didn't put the ask. And I will definitely want to get to what I call a dignified ask in this work. But I think that when we're first giving the insight or the case for support for our work, I think it's important that it's not always attached to an ask. It's clearly, for me, it's about owning the work and owning and maintaining, a sense of power, like you are empowered in doing this work that is, bringing solutions, bringing results to your respective communities. And so anyone, and like my approach has been like anyone that's ready to get on board with this is also benefiting from being a part of this work. And so I want us to also think about that. And so one of my mentors, I would say, he doesn't even know me personally. We've met, but he doesn't know me. But Michael Kaiser, I really follow this cycle approach to thinking about arts organizations. Of course, it has to start with really good art. If we don't have good work, then it's like, what are we doing, And so that great art is followed by aggressive marketing, and that's either institutional marketing and or programmatic marketing. And so I try to encourage teams to not only utilize our social media channels, whether it's email or the social media platforms, to only promote our programs. We have to be talking about, again, the case for support, why we exist, what are some of the things that we are seeing as, experts in our respective lanes. And that, of course, by marketing and sharing your work, you grow your family, as Kaiser would say. And the family is not just the folks in your donor base that have already contributed to your work, but the family are the folks who might, drive by your building and see, oh, folks go in there a lot, like, or have a cursory knowledge about your work or peripheral knowledge, that, are in your zeitgeist. And that's also through social media. That's also expanding your family. And so it's important for us to have as maximum as reach as possible. So folks actually are aware of our work so that then they can become our ticket buyers or our donors. And once they become our ticket buyers and donors, that of course is the what feeds and fuels our work to continue to produce really good work. So sometimes, as one who does has been working with organizations for the past almost a decade that are not exclusively producing artistic product, but being in service to the artistic product, This also tracks because the work that we do is being the source or the fuel for artists in different communities to sustain their work and to, grow their artistic development or their social development of the communities, as well as the cultural, or sorry, the economic development. Seeing that, that $592 billion philanthropic support, well, that doesn't even account for the ticket sales and the revenue that we generate through our work too. And so, um, yeah, just want to highlight this cycle as a really important, just sort of system and structure to be thinking about your work within that context. But the fundraising cycle is also another sort of system that we really have to be super familiar with. It starts with prospecting, of course. I use the four part. You might, know this as like the five part, where identifying your potential or prospective donor is kind of part one, and then qualifying them is part two. I put them together. That's part of the whole the first kind of step for me in growing my donor base. But then cultivation is also often one of the spaces that we get really muddy, and it's not as human centric and really relational. And I find that folks who have that really done really well are most successful in getting to a really solid, dignified ask of simply just making the ask. Folks name that this is getting to the blue, the soliciting or the ask is a challenge for many of us because of, I think, we all have different approaches to and lived experiences around asking for money. I am the youngest child from a family that's some hardworking folk, and I'm a Gemini, and so like I'm flighty and I don't want to ask for money, and so it was the hardest thing for me as I was coming into fundraising. I'm like, no, we can just do it ourselves. Ticket sales, we got this. But no, like this game, if you will, of philanthropy and nonprofit life revolves around having folks in the public space support your work. And once I understood that, and I understood that I wasn't just begging for money, but that it was a relational, like someone investing in this work was also beneficial for them, then it became much easier to make that ask and to be okay with a no or a not right now. But then after we get the resources, we have to be really effective stewards of those relationships and of course those dollars. And then of course that ideally once we're stewarding those relationships, that can again grow our family and ideally generate more folks in our donor base. So prospecting and qualifying your donors. So one of the formulas that I like to use is the ability, connection, experience, and stated interest. And for me, those four pieces make a really we'll use level four donor, if you will. And so a level one would be, we know that they have the ability to give, right? And so some of the platforms that I've used to sort of get to know whether or not folks are able to give have been like iWave or like a donor software. Donor Perfect is another really good platform for some folks. But whatever that is, if you're limited in your budget, maybe ProPublica, or even doing a little bit more research, and elbow lifting and looking at Zillow and property values, like some of that can be beneficial, for a fundraiser in this work. But I think it's really important to just be clear about what can folks give. That's like level one. But the next part is, how are they affiliated with your organization? Are they in that peripheral family of folks who maybe they're one of your donors' relatives, or they're also within the same household, or a friend, or, for those organizations that have ticket buyers, like maybe you notice that the guest of one of your subscribers or regular attendees is they're always the plus one. Maybe they become part of this connection. And so asking how might they be affiliated with us and how can we leverage that affiliation. What I also find is that folks really need to have an experience, a direct experience with your work. And so while crowdfunding mechanisms are really effective, for one-time gift generation. If you're in the long or in the process of trying to build long-term, maybe recurring donors, that's a relationship that you want to maintain. And so they have to experience your work to have an emotional connection and or even like a cognitive, alignment. Like, oh yeah, yeah, that I went to that event and or I saw their the artist showcase that they promoted or something like that. And so having an experience I found is like one of the trickiest but really important parts of the work. And then last but not least, have folks stated an interest in your organization? Have they come to an event and maybe, filled out an audience survey card that said, "Hey, this was really a great experience," or or the like. And so making sure that we're, getting all four of these pieces to this sort of puzzle makes for a really top level donor. But I think that the connection piece, again, like this is really essential. And so this is where I would explicitly ask, like, who might know a particular person who's not in our orbit right now, asking our donors or guests, hey, could you bring a friend? Like if we give you a free ticket or a complimentary something, like bring a friend, like that's where we start to work out some of our own strategies as maybe presenting organizations or performing arts organizations. And so one of the biggest things that as a fundraiser that I hate is when I see fundraisers get glaze eyes when they see like a potential high net worth individual and they're like, "Hello, hi, how are you?" And it feels really like, "Oh God, like you're about to make an ask of me in the first 10 minutes of knowing me." And so I have often had to ask myself, "Okay, am I being a problem here? Am I not really approaching this in a way that dignifies me as one who is, in the service of aggregating resources for my organization, but also looks to people as humans, and not the bank. And so really making sure that we're, as we're thinking about how do we build our relationships with folks, that it is truly the primary objective is to make sure that folks are in relationship with our organizations and our work, and they understand our work so that they can also be ambassadors for our work. So leveling, each of us probably have different, quantifiers for a major donor, mid-level donor, or a foundational donor. When I was at Mid-America Arts Alliance most recently, we would level folks that like gave less than, I think, $50. We would say like they're a friend of the organization. They're baseline, like, hey, they give us a couple dollars, they become a friend. But then they become a foundational donor when they make an investment, a one time or ideally a recurring gift between 50 and $499 dollars. And if you don't know, I would encourage you to really think about creating these sort of groups of like what is this ideal bucket. And it starts with data. It starts with looking at your existing donor base of what are folks giving, that seems really easy. Like the easy lift is a foundational gift, especially if it's a one-time gift. But if you want to, maybe move them to the mid-level donor base, which is a really effective tool for a campaign. I think this year, some research out there has talked about how Giving Tuesday, some folks used Giving Tuesday as a campaign for recurring gifts, which was really effective for them as opposed to, hey, give us this one-time gift. Like, hey, consider giving us a contribution of $100 a month on a regular basis. That, and making the case that that really helps us to sustain our work. It helps us to actually, make some really significant plans and investments for the programs and the services that we're offering. And so that's really an upgrading or the word escapes me right now, but essentially you're in the process of moving, a donor from that foundational to the mid-level. But knowing your numbers is really essential. And then those folks who stay in your family or they're really committed, they're a four-level donor that has, they've expressed interest, they've experienced your work. they have the ability to give, you've qualified them, and they have a connection. Then those folks that have that ability to give at the major donor level really, work on that relationship to make sure that, you're maybe part of their planned giving, but also their annual giving on a regular basis in a recurring way. I found that these folks were our donor advised funds contributors that gave on usually about a lump sum by the end of the year, and so that was an effective time to make an ask. But you have that data at your fingertips just to examine and to really make the case to move folks to that space. I would say less planning is required for foundational gifts, right? That's maybe part of your annual, your annual fundraisers and your different asks throughout the year, whether it's social media or a Giving Tuesday. But when you're trying to really, upgrade and move, mid-level and major donors, then that really requires a longer runway that you're committed to being in relationships. So I would say that if you're trying to move toward a first time gift from someone who has expressed interest and maybe they're not even foundational giving yet, but that they have potential for a major gift. I would say that's like a 12 to 18-month runway, especially if they're at that level one of simply having the ability to give to your organization. A level two might be the ability to give to your organization and they have a connection, and so then for me, the strategy becomes how might I get that connection to really bring that person around or those entities around to experience our work and then to get them to a level four of an expressed interest in our work. So that becomes part of my plan, as opposed to just like thinking that it's going to arbitrarily happen. Now, growing the family. And so I say don't just plan to court, and so again the key word, although court is highlighted, uh the key word is plan here. And so having a 12-month plan for cultivation is really really important. That cultivation is worked within your fundraising, your annual plan, right? I think that, whether it's an individual or sorry, the annual campaign or like a targeted, maybe it's a month sprint. We would often employ those Mid-America Arts Alliance or alternate routes. Like, how are you working those into your plans and also planning around real key engagement opportunities and making the dignified ask? So that's part three of soliciting. I think again, think of yourself as a relationship steward, um, and stewarding the relationship on behalf of the organization. Drop a heart in the chat or on your screen if you have read Don Miguel Ruiz, what is it, the Four Agreements. One of those agreements is to not take it personally. And that was hard for me, y'all, when I tell you, I was like, no, why don't you like me? Give us money. But it's not necessarily about you, it's about the connection. And so we're trying to foster the connection. We're also grounding ourselves in our case for support. Like it is about the impact. And I would also ask, when the ask didn't land in a no, I'm okay with feedback. Like, hey, what could I do to move you or to get you more information on the organization to make this more appealing? Because I really believe that you are someone that would be a great benefit to our community. I think that I stand by this work. I think we're doing really effective work, but maybe I'm not communicating that effectively. What could move you into being interested in giving at this level, or that? And it provides an open sort of dialogue for folks to really say like what didn't land or what did land for them. And so thinking about just really grounding in that case for support. I over prepare in my prospecting. I have known more about people's lives than I care to know, and that is that is by nature of me just being ready to understand who they are, so that once we're in dialogue, we've had our first couple dialogues, I can come back and say, hey, how's your daughter doing? Like, not as a seedy sort of ha 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 gotcha, now I'm in there, but like as a real connection point. And I think y'all being Oprahs are folks that really understand the value of relationship and being a very humane and connected human. And so I think, yeah, leading with that and over preparing in your prospecting. And I say major gifts only after cultivation. Rarely have I had success in asking for a big donation. Even with Mackenzie Scott, which I'm celebrating, that Mid-America Arts Alliance was one of those organizations that was recently received a significant contribution from Mackenzie Scott, a second round of support since the pandemic, the big, announcement of those 265 organizations. But even that was a slight cultivation. I was at another organization, Alternate Roots, that received some funding, and if we didn't have our work, in place, our institutional and programmatic marketing that was talking about the impact of our work, I doubt that there would ever have been a conversation. And so when there was a conversation, it was humane. It was like, hey, yeah, this is what we're doing. This is the plan that we're building out for the next, 3 years. This is, why our work matters. And then there was that, significant contribution. Now, that's clearly not all of us have a Mackenzie Scott, ready to donate, but I like to say that there are Mackenzie Scotts all over our communities, and whether it's a huge gift or whether it's a smaller gift that's a meaningful contribution from that person, it requires cultivation and relationship building. And when you're ready to make that ask, know the ask amount. And that comes from being over prepared in your prospecting. Know exactly what you want what you've done the research to know sort of maybe what they've given to other organizations in the past. But you also know what you need. And you're clear like, hey, this is a very specific ask. We want you to help us with our general operating support, and this is where we're trying to leverage that resource and the like. And so this requires us to really be experts on our organizations, our finances, but also in what the donor might be able to contribute. And then just stand flat-footed, have that courage and connect. And courage is not the absence of fear, but it's doing it in spite of having some of that nervousness. And yeah, I would say it was a series of practice, or years of practice and making those significant asks. But you also may find that you yourself are not the best person to make the ask. And so that comes leveraging the connection points, but also your team. I've worked on teams where I might, on that team be the most extroverted. I also might be the least, you know, the least qualified to make the ask because I just don't have context and knowledge of that person. We haven't had even a single conversation. And so my cold emails as development director, like thinking like, hey, I can leverage my title, doesn't do anything. And so maybe it's a program staffer who has that relationship and that can make that connection to you, that can really get you to make that ask. And then stewardship. This also needs to really be an important part of our planning. And so whenever you receive a donation, maybe you have a plan that we send out a personalized card from the executive director, or we send a birthday card once we know when their birthdays are, or that kind of touch points throughout the year. Once a person has already contributed to your organization, it's making sure that they know that they're now really a part. You're solidified as a family member, and in the ways that folks want to be engaged, they will engage, whether it's through your media blasts. We at Mid-America, we started a donor dish where we're like, hey, we're just going to send out an email to our donors and say like, this is what's up. There was this time in recent years where folks were really, trying to market sort of like this exclusive experience for their donors. And I think that if that works for you, that's relevant. But I try to lean into a little bit more of a community-centric model in that the donor is important and they're really vital to our mission, but they're not the most important thing to me in the mission. The folks who benefit from the work and the folks who do the work are really essential to this work. And so donors are a part of that. And so in embracing them into your ongoing work as a part of this like those four pieces of the puzzle, and communicating to them as such and making them feel like they're a part of this ongoing work, I think is really important. So make that plan that, this time of the year, we're going to send this out, this very special email to our contributors, so that they really know that they're part of this like behind the scenes, community as well. And so I'm going to dive into strategies, knowing that we have 30 minutes left. We're gonna roll through some of these strategies. And the reason I wanted to leverage strategy is because it differentiates from a plan. Many of us have, experienced strategic plans that are really, targeted goals, or like we're gonna get this much by this date, or or the like. But I have found that really thinking about strategy, or if you will, like how are we going to win, if is an approach that I think about often, and what are we trying to win? So, as a regional arts organization in Mid-America, the what I was trying to win is we are going to be the most connected to 6 states, whether folks have get to experience our work directly or indirectly by way of the arts organization that we support. We're going to be connected and rooted in these communities through our board members and through our organization that we support. But we're also going to be experts in our entire landscape. And so I know what's happening in Nebraska because I'm in connection and in conversation with organizations. But like your approach to strategy might be different, but it is not a plan. I just want to highlight that. And that's Roger Martin out of Harvard that said that. And so one of the tools that I've used is this thing called a strategy kernel. A strategy kernel is essentially 3 parts of understanding what is your approach to winning. And it starts with a diagnosis. And so what are you trying to solve? So yeah, back to your case for support. Um, but then there's a guiding policy. There's we were talking about bowling earlier. But the guiding policy would be like bumper card, or sorry, not bumper rails at the bowling alley, that like you operate within this confine intentionally. Um, or if you think about diagnosis, prognosis. So if I break my arm, diagnosis, you need to fix the bone and you need to reset the bone. And you need to not use that arm, right? But the prognosis would be like, we're going to put a cast on your arm. We're going to you're going to have to do some after 6 to 8 weeks of casted arm so it doesn't move. Then we're going to do like some physical therapy on the arm to get the muscle fibers back to operational. And then the coherent action would be, you get a month supply of pain relief because you're going to be in pain, but then the cast, and then we take the cast off after 6 weeks and the like. And so knowing that these particular kind of steps will be additive to your particular your practices in fundraising. And so I use the example of we have a 25K shortage. Our guiding policy is that we're going to employ the targeted campaign model to fix that shortage. So we know going into the year or at a particular time of the year, maybe this big donor didn't come through that we expected, or this funder. And so we're going to use don't individual giving as the medium to cover that. And so what do? We launch a campaign. We start with a brief. We have established goals and a timeline. We assign roles from the programs to the development team. Executive director has a part of this work, as well as maybe some other folks as well, our board members and the like. We might have some media drops. We have a plan. So we are working in a coherent system that everyone understands their particular piece of this challenge that we're trying to solve for. And so this has been really effective for me in my work. And so I also want us to reimagine the role of the fundraiser or the development director, if that's your lane. And so you have your board of directors. And I'm using the Browns. The Browns are not my team, but they are just very visible right now, just so you know. Board of directors, essentially, you are the GM. You are thinking about the entire infrastructure of the organization, making sure our board of directors support our executive director, and they make the hiring and firing decisions on who is the best person to lead the team, essentially. But our development directors really should be quarterbacking in this work. And so if I'm throwing a long pass to my programs team, and who are maybe our star players, our wide receivers, because that's what everybody shows up for, the wide receiver, then like that's really important role. So we need to be in communication and conversation, and whether your organizational chart looks a bit more hierarchical, um, but or if it's a little bit more flat, it's important for the development directors, in my opinion, to really be fluent and fluidly connected to all of the work across the organization and being able to really hold that strategy, and shepherd that and steward that. And so this is the squatted, the who's on your squad, and knowing, like I said, like sometimes I wasn't the best person to make an ask. In fact, when I was I remember for the artist services division at Mid-America, our director of the artist services, Diane Scott, was actually one of the best people to make an ask directly to a foundation based on her rapport with this foundation and the lane that she was in. And there was a collegial understanding of support for artists that she was able to generate multi-year support that I would never have been able to do through the typical relationship trying to build, and it definitely wouldn't have come within like the months of just conversations. And so I think about like assessing your team through the strengths. Who are your board members? Mid-America Arts Alliance also had a really phenomenal board chair that was like all in, and I would meet with her and my CEO regularly. That was like, a gift, and I have not always experienced that board chairs are really active. But who are your board members, and how might we leverage their strengths and their networks, but mostly their service to the organization. Senior leadership, what strengths might they bring in the fundraising work, as well as the development staff. One of my practices when I lead development teams is I make sure that to know who am I the C or what am I the CEO of on the team. And it gives us a chance to see how everyone's approaching their work respectively, and what are the gaps. So we also in development, we have to identify what are the gaps of how we might be able to accomplish our fundraising goals. And, uh, moving forward, communications and development rapport. That's really essential. Having a tight relationship with your communications director, or connecting the thin line between development and communications. No, everything should not be fundraising centric on your social media, but you should be speaking the same language and having a really solid cadence and rhythm with your communications team if you're in development. I'm gonna some folks like are my inspirations in this work. Risha Ballas, who's in the middle, was the development director when I was at Dayton Live, Victoria Theater Association, and I watched how human she was, and by human I mean just like a relational. She was with our every donor, whether they were major donors or small time giving. I also look to Donna Walker Kuhn, who coined or wrote the book about invitation to the party and reimagining who your donor base is and can be. And then Bozoma St. John, who's just like a marketing powerhouse. These are some folks who I think have done really important work, and so having some inspiration in this work, because sometimes it can get a little lonely. You're like out here just hustling and head down and thinking all these strategies, but it's really important to really think expansively and stay inspired in the work too. So just wanted to drop that nugget. And so in our last few minutes here, talking campaigns. So it's really important and this comes from the DeVos Institute of Arts Management, to be able to target your campaigns or understand which campaigns might appeal best and be the best use of your time. And so I know that we're hitting a lot of things. We're talking campaigns, we're talking, strategies, but I think all of this is just sort of important for this moment that we're in for us, especially as we're rounding out the year, to really take a reflective look at our work. But I would never engage a major donor around a crowdfunding campaign. And I also didn't leverage crowdfunding as much as many of my colleagues, particularly because I was always interested in like the relationship. And so, yes, crowdfunding can be a really great entry point into relationship, but stats, and data has shown that like very few folks return as ongoing, or maybe a return for a second gift after that. And so that's really essential. And so But yeah, thinking about your entry level folks as crowdfunding special events because maybe outside of their ticketed events or ticket purchase, they give like a small gift or a one-time offering. But then also just thinking incorporating them into your annual campaign. An annual campaign, by that I just mean your year fundraising goal. So I'm not saying, that's not unique or to me. Like that's incorporating all of the strategies, all of the plans that you have for the year. And then when you have your mid-level folks, engaging them in the capital campaign, I think that's a really good group to really provide a basis for your campaign. But of course, the bigger dollars, from endowments and planned giving and capital, that's what we often want to put our work towards because you get the most return on your investment in that time. But this is just something to take a snapshot of and to think about. So annual campaigns, I start with a review of our prior year's performance. What did we do? What did we do well? What were some of the gaps and how might we build this next year's fundraising strategy from from the current year? I am not, I'm a more of a practical or pragmatic fundraiser in that like I don't make big wish gift or I don't bank on wishes. So if I am pretty confident that we can really cultivate a donor towards a larger gift or data from that donor and relational insights will tell me that, then I'll put them on our list as a real stretch goal. Otherwise, I'm banking on what we know we can get, and we're making real, solid decisions based on that for the most part. I love to make sure that we're collaborating to establish these goals. So working with your programs, divisions, and finance, as well as we as development folks get to steward our executives, directors, our CEOs' big vision for the organization. And so having those conversations are really, really crucial. You draft your data informed plan or scorecard. So Mid America Arts Alliance, we would use a scorecard to say like these are what we expect to get this year. This is the shortcomings that we might have, but this is where we're going to be building out some strategy and some of those plans that we were talking about before to address some of those things. But starting your year with that in hand is really going to help you in the long run. So everyone's on the same page, respectively. And identifying those key players, like I said, like your team is not just your development division, it's the entire organization. And so, how are they going to fit into this big, ideally, your big, bold, sexy dream of attaining all of the resources that you need for the year? And I say schedule across the 12-month fiscal year. If December is going to be a downtime for the organization, and that should be planned for you, as opposed to there's no grants, there's no the portals are shored up, and so I would make sure that that's and everything is part of your plan for the year. And so here's just a little doc from the Georgia Center for Nonprofits, and I found it to be really effective. To as I'm thinking about my annual plans, I'm thinking right away, how are we connecting with marketing? But yes, we're going to have our year-end appeal, like that we're clearly building off of our successes from the past and what we've learned. And moving that, yes, into our mid-year appeal. So maybe you have a year end or a start of year, mid-year appeal. What are your events that are going to be a part of your strategy for the year? How are you going to leverage social media, especially, like I said, those institutional, ongoing sort of this is who we are, this is what we do, this is why we matter sort of campaigns. And then, stewardship at the bottom there, our emails and newsletters. How are you really making the appeals, in the right vehicles, whether it's email, always more successful for me than social media. But again, making those actively part of your plan so that you can really work across your organizations to implement them. And these targeted campaigns are time sensitive campaigns. And so I would say that employing maybe 2 to 3 targeted campaigns a year is really good, to leverage the opportunities of just staying in the asking space, and so I would usually start with a campaign goal. And this was, I learned this from DeVos Institute as well. Having that campaign goal, a timeline, and describing it almost like a creative brief for the entire team that understands their work, and then planning within that again. So it's like a smaller period of time, a smaller window to execute a specific request, whether maybe it's membership for your organization. Hey, we want to sponsor memberships. We need a targeted goal of $50,000, and we're going to do this between this month, and we're going to do email blasts and social media. Maybe it ties right into Giving Tuesday or not. So really thinking about how do you employ those targeted gifts to engage your donor base and your family. And so this would be like how I might structure, again, from DeVos Institute, how I might structure the levels. So if I know that my goal is about $100,000, then I'm thinking like I got four top level, or they say circle A, I say level four donors. They've had the experiences, they are major gift abilitied or able to give major gifts. And so I'm gonna lean on them for the $4,000 in those $10,000 gifts. And maybe my next circle, I need more folks to make that happen. So I've qualified again with research and data, folks to that we have targeted for these gifts. Now you see in the middle the number of donors that we need. That is not the number of donors that I'm going to be soliciting for these gifts. Usually it's probably double of what these are. So I'm definitely asking about 10 folks in the circle A because I've qualified and said that we need four donors. But if I can ask 10 folks who are already in relationship with our organization for $10,000, then that might be, we might get more than we asked for. And so these numbers in the middle, they're goals, but they're also sort of like the bare minimum that we're trying to accomplish because we've researched and really thought about as the number of folks that we might benefit. And so, yeah, that's one strategy. I also, and I think this is one of the last strategies I'm going to share, but what I adopted in the last 5 years has been the 12-week year that has really, for me, transformed the execution of the work. And I recommend it because not only does it, intentionally take your big annual giving plan and shrink it into 12 weeks and just, have your team really, execute it. It removes some of the fluff time of like, do we really, and I will vacillate between the plan. Like, is this the best plan? Maybe it's not, so it just helps you to really be decisive and to really go hard in the paint, if you will, for your work. But it also has a built-in evaluation and improvement mechanism week to week within that 12 weeks. And so, hey, maybe, we had that big ambitious goal to get $40,000 from our high net worth individuals, but we were only able to get one. What didn't work? Why didn't it work? Like, what did we try? What, was our data off? Are they really not that qualified? It helps you in real time to process that and to apply that. It also features strategy blocks. And so what I have found sometimes is that we as fundraisers don't, attribute time to really think about and just plan and to be in that kind of creative space that we need to be in. And so there's a 3 hour strategy block that I would always, and I continue to this day, block out my calendar. So it's really about me being in my office with a drawing board and, looking at the data and like, how can we get to this person? How can we connect more? What do they need from us? And the like, and how might I really leverage my team? What do they need from me to do this work most effectively? There's a weekly scorecard and that you would go over with your team at accountability meetings that's kind of set into there. And those are really effective because if there was something that the lead fundraiser, didn't accomplish, I could say, you know what? We maybe missed our target or we're just getting to our target because I didn't do this particular thing. And so it leaves, you cut out the demystify or you demystify maybe some of those things that you're not sure of within your work. But then also you always have a focused daily action to execute. And so these are just some sources that you'll receive and some of the folks that have been included in today's presentation.
Thank you, DeMarcus. Thank you so much. That was an incredible amount of information. A participant asked a question about like funders, including state art agencies, are asking to control messages of arts organizations, including program and word choices. Like, should organizations distance themselves from grants like this, or should they make the change? And also, is this kind of happening outside of large state federal funders and big individual big donors? Are they doing the same as well? What's that landscape like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's an inventory of your values first and foremost. And if, for instance, organizations here in Memphis have, been rewarded by some philanthropists for using the language of social justice, right? Or for rectifying historic harms done to marginalized communities. And I think that if that is in your value system, then you have to continue to leverage that and also take into account that that might be penalized in the current administration that we live in. But I think that if you can also articulate your why behind that and use data and use that framework of context and results that you've experienced through delivering that work and that service, that I think it bolsters your case. And I never say chase the dollars, but you know your lived experience better than I. And but I do think that I have seen where organizations have been able to continue to toe that or hold fast to their values, that resources come from other spaces. And so I would encourage you to really lean into your values there. But I understand that that's also a hard position for some folks. So um, that's an answer and maybe a non-answer at the same time. But I would hold the line.
Thank you, DeMarcus. There are also a few more questions in the chat. I think there was one earlier that asked about like what do they do as a one person band
Yeah.
in an
I
organization?
For sure. I would say the most effective thing that you can do as a one person, been there, done that, is to have that strategy block to really give yourself the space and the time to plan and to understand what is the most effective use of your time and how can you leverage other entities, whether it's volunteers or otherwise. When I was at Alternate Roots, we were really leaning into what does a giving circle mean for us. And because the organization was about a 14 state, covered this whole Southeast, including DC, it was really important for us to be in community, real community with folks, our members in each of those states, but also DC, and to talk about like how might we be effectively fundraising at the individual level and not in competition with your folks in the city and or in the specific community or city, but it really required us to plan, and I had to leverage volunteers for that work because I was a one person development team for a long time. So yeah, use that strategy block, use these systems and things, automate as much as you can too. Using Salesforce, there's different features, but Salesforce had a feature where once you received a donation, it would generate for me an automated thank you letter, which I would just personalize and then send out. And so whatever you can do to block out that time to be strategic and then to automate if you can, I would really suggest that.
Hi, thank you for putting this together and all the information. It's been really helpful. I'm a contract worker, so I do nonprofit writing for different organizations, and it's always they'll be with me for a year, they'll be with me for 3 years, they'll be with me for 3 months. So,
Mhm.
do you have any recommendations on like worksheets or checklists when you're going into an org that you're not familiar with to get that data to understand their story?
Yeah. Oh, to understand their story. I love that. I usually do a sort of audit of past grants, like the last 3 years that they've received. Also, those ideally, if the organization has maintained and tracked, a record of all of the things that they didn't even receive, and like what was the narrative, and that typically that's a huge load of work of that first initial sprint. of examining just how are you already talking about your organization, what stands out, what has been successful with those particular funders. But then I'd take a look at, of course, at their 990s, and then their projected and actual budgets for the last 3 years as well. And to me, and of course, looking at their websites and all of the narrative that has existed about the organization, and I took that feel, I don't know, I get like a really clear picture of what they're saying about themselves, who they believe themselves to be, and sort of the context of where they are. And so I would look for like the checklist I would kind of make is like, give me all of that information. Give me, I would do a survey of the social media and any of the emails as well. But then uh, just and you know also moving forward. So what is your plan for this year? How have you communicated that plan? And if you don't have a plan, like how might we collaborate and steward that? So like what are some things that are important for us to really attain? I also find that organizations sometimes get really um, optimistic when they're working with a contractor from the outside because they're like, yes, an expert can come in and get all of the money. And so, like, really level setting that we're gonna do this, this number of grants per week, per month, but so trying to stabilize some expectations, but while also stretching them to really make sure that we have as much information for the current year and our future next maybe year to 3 years moving forward.
I want to uplift in the chat too, because there are some great questions. What info do you share in the Donor Dish newsletter?
Yeah, so we would share, and this might have adapted or evolved since my time there, but Tabitha Dunham, who leads the charge now, helped to develop the donor dish. So maybe it's the same. But we would share like any like really cool stories about our team, so folks really understood who was doing the work. So they had like a kind of a spotlight on the staff, but also connection to like a bigger thing that maybe that staff was their team was in service to. So for instance, the exhibits team at Mid-America Arts Alliance does a lot of work behind the scenes to help organizations with their fractional services. We were in service to making sure that small to mid-size institutions could have an affordable exhibition. They didn't have to do all the labor to put that thing together, but they could just, basically plug and play, like unbox and put into, on the walls or whatever. And we gave them all of the instructions to do that. But and it was a cost for service, but we significantly subsidized that work. And so talking about maybe Kathy Dowell, who was leading that work, and doing like a little spotlight on her, but then also talking about the work that we were doing and why it mattered and why it was so important and what problems we were solving and the results of those problems were, how we were benefiting other folks' bottom line because of that. But then also making, maybe making an ask for, hey, and now we're in our targeted campaign season. We need we're trying to raise $50,000. Would love for you to contribute a meaningful gift in addition to your ongoing support that we appreciate. So we're saying thank you, but we're also saying here's what your work is impacting and the personal connection to it. But then also this is where we are still needing some support.
Yeah, I have another granular question. It's really small. But the difference between what I'm understanding, the difference between a target campaign and a crowdfunding campaign is the people you're talking to and how you're talking to them. So imagine like a targeted campaign would not be on social media. Is that right?
No, not necessarily true. So I think a crowdfunding campaign is a little bit more open net, like, hey, we need $100,000. We don't necessarily know who we're talking to, but we're just kind of throwing out into the atmosphere. We might be using like a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or something like that that kind of um is a little bit more general. I think a targeted campaign is very specific. And so maybe it does kind of tie into like maybe you could use a GoFundMe platform for a targeted campaign, but you're also thinking about like who are we directly connecting to? How are we messaging through email blasts as well for a specific goal within our fundraising season? So all of the fundraising, I guess, is not going to take place on the crowdfunding campaign. So you can tie, mix and match, if you will.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. It might be too vague, but we'll see what you got. How do you strategize where to physically be to meet people in person to create that relationship? Especially
Mm,
with that, like we don't have much notoriety. We're
yeah.
known in the community, but like how do we get access to spaces to meet people that can help us move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would approach this multiple ways. Looking at the organizations that might be doing similar work, and not that you're maybe I imagine that you're starting an organization because the work is not being done in the way that you
Hmm.
can do the work in your community. But I think that the folks who might be interested in supporting your work, maybe creating personas of who would you imagine to be the people that are going to be invested. Are they arts educated? Are they with the message around community uplift be the thing that targets them? And so maybe they're on the donor lists of other organizations like the food bank or the university if you have one, or colleges in your community. And where are they? Like, where might they be? Are there events that maybe you have to invest towards, like the
Hmm.
the donor brunches, or the Chamber of Commerce spaces that you might want to just be in connection to. Um, Also, maybe there's some faith-based organizations that have folks who are interested in work beyond the church or the mosque
Hmm.
or the synagogue. So I would just like think about those personas that you imagine would be the ideal folks to connect to your work. I would also leverage opportunities, in public, whether there's an artist showcase or artist, meetup or something like that, that you can just share the word about your work. And in what is the MVP? We don't also often use like the minimum viable product for arts organizations, but what can you provide in a small scale so that those experiences are what lead the conversation for your work as opposed to the fundraising.
So in that way, like how do we provide a small example of our experience to get
Exactly.
somebody to buy in? Okay, it's a
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
All
And then
right,
also,
wonderful.
maybe it's self-amplification. Like maybe you start a blog or a YouTube channel that you're sharing with folks to say like, hey, this is what we're, this is who we are. These are the contexts. Because sometimes it is context setting. Even if I live in the city, I may not know that this is a challenge that people experience or a need. And so, getting the media part of like sharing, like we're launching this project, and this is what the problem is, and this is the solution that we're trying to bring to the community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for being here, y'all. Have a
Yeah.
great day.
Thank you all. Happy holidays. Bye.